兄弟姊妹平安。
Peace, brothers and sisters.
今仔是要繼續講到合乎神心意的人大衛。
We are going to continue our topic on David, a man after God's own heart.
咱來看幾所在聖經，
Let us look at a couple of scripture verses.
咱來看使徒行傳13章22節。
Acts chapter 13, verse 22.
擊毀了掃羅，就選立大衛做因的王，因為伊做見證講，我心得耶西的囝大衛，伊是合我心意的人，凡事要遵行我的旨意。
And when he had removed Saul, he raised up for them David as king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will.
嗰一個所在是米迦書6章第8節，講說的呢，耶和華已指示你何為善，伊向你所要的是什麼呢？只要你行公義，好人面，存謙卑的心，甲你的神同行。
Micah chapter 6, verse 8. He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
然後講到大衛是合乎神心意的人，
Here we see that David was a man after God's own heart.
使徒行傳是路加，伊毋是這個毋是路加的意見。
This is not the comment of Luke, the doctor.
是撒母耳的看法，
It is not the opinion of Samuel.
是神為大衛做見證。
This is what God is testifying about David,
你講伊是我，伊是合乎我心意的人。
that David is a man after my own heart.
為什麼大衛是神所競選合神心意的人？
Why is it that David was chosen by God and he had become the man after his own heart?
咱就講到幾落點咯。第一是大衛有穩重的屬靈生活，
There are many points, and firstly, David had a hidden spiritual life.
第二有神的同在，
Second, he had the presence of God.
大衛關心。第三是大衛關心神的見證。
Thirdly, David was concerned with God's testimony.
第四，大衛有清氣的心，正直的靈。
And fourth, David had a clean heart and a steadfast spirit.
第五是講大衛肯學習。
And fifth, David was willing to learn.
第六是講大衛凡事要遵行神的旨意。
And sixth, David had done all of God's will.
今日要講到第七點但我無可能講了，我會講一半者第七大衛的謙卑。
And we are going to the seventh point, which is David's humility. We're going only to tackle half of it.
咱來看第一伊怎樣的謙卑。
How he was humble. Let us look at first sub
咱
point.
先來看大衛，因年幼的時陣被膏之前，
We will just look first at David in his youth before he was anointed.
咱知影撒母耳邀請耶西家佇遐是一個真非常這個非常尊貴的這個叫做場面。
Samuel invited the whole household of Jesse to a very prestigious, important occasion.
大衛比伊的爸爸佇遐袂記得嗎？
Did Jesse had forgotten David?
或者是講說刻意的無願意大衛佇遐參加這個場面。
Maybe it was his intention not to bring David to this occasion.
你會看到講說當佇遐因7個兄弟對撒母耳的面前敬敬的時陣，
When the 7 brothers went before Samuel,
神就講毋是遮，毋是啊。
God told Samuel, these are not the ones.
所以撒母耳佇遐問講說，也有無？你有囡仔無？
So Samuel asked Jesse, are there still more men in your household?
你看到耶西講說，也有一個水現在咧放羊。
He said, yes, there remains yet the youngest. He is now tending some sheep.
你會看到講說啊，也是看伊嘅羊比較大衛更加重要。
You can see that Jesse had looked at his sheep
當插入
more
呢
important than David himself.
插入呢啲下要獻祭，
So when Samuel was going to do this
要
sacrifice,
請也是全家啊，啲下要食這個祭嘛。
and he had invited the whole household of Jesse to eat this sacrifice meat.
也是啲下冇叫大衛嚟。
And you can see that Jesse did not bring David.
當也插入啲問也是講，也有冇？伊講說也有這個水。
So when Samuel asked Jesse, "Are there still any remaining men in your household?" And Jesse said, "Yes, we the youngest one."
插入呢講先，打發一來，伊若無來嘅時陣啊，咱無要祭寫。
And so Samuel said, "You have to bring him here, or else we will not start this sacrifice."
你看插入呢啲下堅持啊，大衛袂比，若無大衛袂比較，比單高，插入呢個面前。
It was Samuel who insisted, or else they will not bring David to this occasion.
這個做僕人聽講，
So one of the servants of God said,
這同人看出啊，這大衛啲伊家己嘅家庭中啊，啲下被輕視啊。
so we can see that in his household, he was really despised.
做僕人啊，Alan Redpath 也有講，
God's servant, Alan Redpath, said,
那些大衛啲爸爸嘅眼前啊是，好似是安尼款嘅水啦。
"So small was David in his father's esteem."
你教我講說先知啲啊，要請全家來嘅時陣啊，要來獻祭時陣，因為講說大衛啊，啲啊無啥物啦。
So that it was considered unnecessary to include David in this occasion. So when the prophet of God called them for the sacrifice,
無需要啲下包括大衛來參加。
and it's not necessary to include David to this in this sacrifice.
對整個嘅這個家啊，是一個真重要，重要嘅一個邀請。
This invitation was a really important one for the whole family.
這個真尊貴嘅一個場面。
It is a very prestigious occasion.
第啲看到我大衛有這款嘅感覺啦。
So David will have this kind of feeling.
所以寫詩篇嘅時陣，
So when he wrote Psalms,
伊也係表達出來。
he expressed it.
詩篇27篇第10節講說：我嘅父母離棄我，耶和華必收留我。
In Psalm 27, verse 10, it says, "When my father and mother forsake me, then the Lord will take care of me."
你看到講說，這同人看見大衛嘅卑微啊，
We can see the lowliness of David.
因為咧飼羊嘅時陣，咧放羊嘅時陣，那是一個僕人嘅工作啊。
Because looking after sheep was a servant's job.
但以大衛來看，伊講出來嘅話講說，這個職業是一個真危險嘅職業。
According to David's own words, this is an extremely dangerous work.
伊講所羅講啊，
He told Saul,
這僕人為賣白親底下咧放羊嘅時陣，有時來曬啊，有時來鹹。
that your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came,
因底下來嘅時陣，我底下含一隻，我底下羊羔去，
and took a lamb out of the flock,
我就對關底下，我要打，要擊打因，
I went out after it and struck it,
就對個將個羊對因嘅口中嘅搶出來。
and delivered the lamb from its mouth.
伊就講說，因起來後仔就險咯，曬起來要害我，我就將伊拍死。
And when it rose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it.
所以真啲看講說，你放羊啊，唔是只有講說一個真卑微啊，是真這個僕人嘅一個職業。
A shepherd is not that easy. It's not only a servant's job.
但是也是一個真危險嘅一個工作。
It is a very dangerous work.
咱这次来看大卫比撒母耳高以后的时阵，高后的时阵，
David, after being anointed by Samuel,
大卫仍然是卑微伫遐咧顾因爸爸的样啊。
David is still humbly taking care of his father's sheep.
当扫罗欠用伊的时阵，
When Saul needed him,
第撒母耳记上第16章19节遐记载讲，对安尼扫罗差遣使者去见亚西讲，请你打发你放羊的囝大卫到我家来。
in 1 Samuel 16, verse 19, therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me your son David, who is with the sheep.
你看到大卫被膏了后时阵，伊仍然伫遐咧饲羊啊。
Even after he was anointed by Samuel, he still tended his dad's sheep.
伊伫遐卑微的这工作咧顾因爸爸的羊。
It was a very lowly work or job, and looking after his father's flock.
大卫有法通甲亚西讲啊，伊的爸爸讲啊。
David can say to his father,
先知爸，先知撒母耳，这看重我，计我的阿兄，你为什么一直会看轻我？
he could say that, Father, Samuel, the prophet, had anointed me and approved of me over my other brothers. Why do you still look down on me?
我已经被膏了呐。
I have been anointed already.
我一个，伫神眼中，我是一个尊贵的地位呐。
In God's sight, I have an honorable position.
伊无安尼讲啊，
But he did not say that.
伊继续的卑微的谦卑卑顺服因爸爸，伫遐顾因爸爸的羊。
But he still continued to humbly look after his father's sheep.
呀，一直会顺服啊。
And he was obeying his father's command.
被看轻的时阵，伊仍然伫遐卑微的顺从伊的爸爸。
Even though he was despised, he was still obeying his father.
彼得前书5章6节讲，所以你要自卑，服伫神大能的手下，交了时候，伊必叫你成功。
In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6, therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time.
这圣经伫遐甲咱讲说，咱着自卑啊。
The Bible taught us to be humble.
我听，因为咱遐所做嘅，我所做嘅，就话咱无欢喜嘅代志，不如意嘅代志咱必须着一直的自卑。
Sometimes we encounter adverse circumstances, but we still must be humble.
你看到大卫。
We can see David.
伊爸爸伫遐看见伊，因厝内人看见伊，伊仍然伫遐自卑，伫遐顺从。
Even though his father and the whole household despised him, but he was still there, very humbly obeying them.
伊讲服伫神大能的手下，
It says, submit yourself under the hand of
伊
God,
只讲这伫大能的神大能的手下，
under the mighty hand of God.
咱就认定讲说，伊隆重的代志发生的拢是出伫神啊。
We have to acknowledge that everything that happened, it had gone through God's hand.
所以咱就服伫神大能的手下。
So we have to submit to the mighty hand of God.
这讲从到了时候，
It says, in due time.
咱伫一个神有伊的时间啊。
We know that God has his own timetable.
你看神，毋是讲一直拖大卫伫遐咧饲羊。
God did not let David tend his father's sheep always.
神有伊的时间。
God has his own time.
听好就讲说例外咯，伫咱的内面真实服落来。
It is until you and I submit truly to God's mighty hand.
兄弟姊妹，
Brothers and sisters,
你会看到讲说特别到人伫遐，看轻你的时阵，
brothers and sisters, when people despised you,
你伫遐，你会袂欢喜啊。
you will not be happy.
但神講說，咱就自卑服伫神帶領嘅手嘅。
But God tells us to be humble and submit
這
and
是
go
講，
under the mighty hand of God.
就是講說神有伊嘅時間，不過是咧聽候咱伫咱嘅內面真服落來。
God has his timetable and he really wants to see us that we are submitting to him inwardly.
好，最後啊講說，伊必叫恁升高啊，要升起來。
And then he says he will exalt you.
即係講說升高，唔是講只有講咱嘅地位會變做較高嘅地位。
It does not mean that your status will become higher.
即係神要互咱看啊，即係一個主嘅僕人講，神要互咱看講說，當咱真正順服嘅時陣，
And the servant of God said that if we really submit to God,
伊係咱帶領到一個超脱嘅生活。
he will lead us to a transcendent life.
我伫遐，互咱任何所做嘅，哦，伫遐袂影響到咱，
And anything that happens will not affect us anymore
因為咱啊是繼續超越嘅生活。
because we are leading a transcendent life.
啊，有時為什麼咱啊直直過袂起啊？我哋真艱苦心啊，就真我直安尼真艱苦啊！
But why do we sometimes are unhappy in our state?
咱所做嘅一直都影響到咱這個人，
Because whatever happened to us, it has already affected us very
因為
badly.
啊，因為咱無伫遐自卑，伫遐服伫神帶領嘅手嘅。
Because we did not humbly submit to God's mighty hand.
你試看覓，
Just try it.
你所做嘅啊艱難痛苦，
All the adverse events that happen to you
但是像你無歡喜嘅代志，
and all the things that you are not that are not very pleasant to you,
你直接伫遐一直打順服落來。
if you really submit,
講神講說，到了時候啊，
God says in due time,
到了你真正伫內面服落來時陣，
it is until what is in your inner spirit had submitted to God,
神就同咱過這個超越嘅生活。
God will help us lead a transcendent life.
你所做嘅代志啊，袂影響到你。
All the things that happen to you will not affect you anymore.
咱過來看所落去，大衛伫咧服侍所羅嘅時陣，
Yeah, this time was David while serving under King Saul.
你會看講說，有惡魔吼伫遐咧來教了所羅啊，
There is this tormenting spirit that are doing some harm in Saul.
即個神僕該講說，你找一個真有彈琴嘅，吼伫遐吼教你遮來，嗱你教了你惡魔，你教了你，你叫佢彈琴啊？
So one of his servants said, "Why don't you find someone who is good at playing the harp, so that
Yeah.
when you are being tormented, he can play the harp for you?"
有人找咗大衛，
So they found David.
我無念教所羅嘅身頂嘅時陣。
And when this evil spirit had gone into Saul,
大衛就彈琴啊，
so David was there playing the harp.
所羅變啲舒暢爽快啊，然後啲惡魔就離開了伊。
And Saul was really refreshed and became well. And this evil spirit had left him.
你看到講啥？迄時陣啊，一套所羅啊，啲會真爽啊，
He made Saul quite refreshed
無頭無尾啲來教了。
and not being tormented by the spirit.
所羅啊，你看到講說啲撒母耳記上16章21節講大衛教了所羅遐，就施立喺所羅面前，所羅心喜愛伊，真聽伊，伊就做了所羅為兵器嘅人。
In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 21, it says, David came to Saul and stood before him. And he, which is Saul, loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer.
就咱就注意啊，所羅真聽大衛，
You can see that Saul loved David,
伊真喜愛大衛，
and he was very pleased with him.
然後伊佫托大衛做伊甲兵器嘅人啊。
And David became his armor bearer.
这个撒母耳記上16章22節講說，掃羅找見人去見亞西，講叫你用你用大衛設立在我面前，因為伊在我眼前蒙了恩。
In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 22, then Saul sent to Jesse, saying, "Please let David stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight."
咱注意這幾句話，即掃羅深愛大衛。
It says here that Saul loved David greatly,
然後伊就做掃羅為兵器嘅人。
and he became Saul's armor bearer.
大衛在掃羅眼前蒙了恩。
And then David found favor in the king's sight.
你會看到講說，喺撒母耳記上17章15節啊。
And in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 15,
但大衛有時離開掃羅，會逼離鄉啊，啲咧幫因爸爸嘅羊啊。
but David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem.
你做王嚇，你服侍王嘅時陣，
You know that when you serve the king,
你無隨便我當請假啦。
you cannot take any leave of absence.
掃羅無需要嘅時陣，
And when Saul did not require his service,
逃逸我當倒去。
he can go home.
但倒去時陣，
When he goes home,
伊仍然是咧顧因爸爸嘅羊啊。
he still tends his father's sheep.
啥無願意點佇王嘅邊頭底下咧服侍啊？
Who wouldn't want to stay with the king and serve him?
王食真好啊！
And all the food of the king is really good.
你看真濟人底下咧服侍王，
And there are many people serving the king.
你其中大衛其中底下咧服侍，
And David was one of them.
比較你顧因爸爸嘅羊，較爽快嘛。
So it is really better than be tending his father's sheep.
所以有時到掃羅無需要嘅時陣，你倒去，
So when Saul did not require his service anymore,
所
he
以
went home.
我再講，伊無法通請假。
You know that he cannot take any leave of absence.
雖然大衛已經被膏了，
Even though David was already anointed
喺掃羅面前底下咧服侍，
and he was serving before Saul,
望掃羅底下喜愛，
he was greatly loved by Saul,
喺王嘅眼前蒙了恩啊！
and he found favor in the king's sight.
但倒去時陣，
But when he goes home,
仍然底下你顧因爸爸嘅羊啊，
he still tends his dad's sheep.
繼續一個牧羊嘅生活。
He lived a life of a shepherd.
其實大衛我通講亞西講，嘢爸爸講啊，
David can tell his father,
爸你知影無？你知掃羅啊，底下我是蒙了掃羅嘅恩啊！
he can say,
Bo-
Father, I have found favor in the king's
伊
sight,
個真喜愛我，
and he loved me greatly,
佢同我做伊甲兵器嘅人啊！
and he had made me his armor bearer.
我曬阿兄，我因底下你服侍掃羅，
And my 3 brothers are also serving Saul,
我有4阿兄，
and the rest of the 4 brothers.
為什麼你直直叫我去咧羔羊啊？
But why do you still tell me to tend your sheep?
我哋王嘅面前啊，我哋王嘅咧服侍王，我是真有地位呢。
When I'm serving the king, I have a higher status.
你知咩？
But brothers and sisters,
你係看到講說，伊仍然繼續這個卑微嘅生活，
but he still lived a very lowly life.
過因爸爸嘅樣啊！
He was still tending his father's sheep.
你知咩？
Brothers and
咱
sisters,
咱成功嘅時陣，
sometimes if you are very successful
你公司啊，你有地位嘅時陣，
and you have a high position in your company
你公司你有成就嘅時陣啊！
or some achievements in your company,
你知咩？也見啊，要驕傲起來是真緊，
it is very easy for that person to be proud.
但係會有成就。
But David also has his accomplishments.
我安尼服侍時陣，同王真舒服啊，
When I served
真
the
爽啊！
king, he was quite refreshed.
你看到講說，有成就，
We know that he has this
伊地位。
achievements. He has this status,
你看到你甲王嘅兵器，
and he was the armor bearer.
意思是讲常常伫王嘅边头啊。
He was always beside the king.
但是啊，伊伫遐仍然卑微地服侍伊嘅爸爸。
He was still humbly serving his father.
兄弟姊妹，
Brothers and sisters,
我自己是一直要學嘅一個功課。
this is one lesson that I must always learn.
有時我你講話嘅時陣啊，
When I am speaking,
你雖然冇講迄句話出來，
even though if you don't say it,
但是啊，人底下會感覺到啊，
people will notice.
好似像講，若無我，若唔是我，
If you say, if it were not for me or without me,
你會看到講說，雖然冇正迄句話講出來，
if you didn't even say these phrases,
但神是看咱嘅心啊。
but God looks at our hearts.
你看大衛時陣，
When he looked at
你
David,
是看大衛嘅心啊。
he saw David's heart.
你看到大衛是何等嘅謙卑啊，
He saw how humble David was.
卑微嘅底下來服侍伊嘅爸爸來羔羊啊。
He was humbly serving his father, tending his sheep.
有一個姊妹啊，真客氣嘅底下咧改正我，
There was a sister who politely corrected me.
伊甲我講啊，
She told me,
你咧交通見證嘅時陣，常常用我。
when you are giving your testimony, you always use I, myself, and me.
兄弟姊妹，
Brothers and
有
sisters,
兄弟姊妹要改正咱嘅時陣，咱是真正福氣啊！
if we are so blessed if someone or anyone try to correct us.
你會看到有時咱讀聖經啊，底下咧講照，咱也袂會，咱也袂會到。
Sometimes we are enlightened while we're reading the Bible, but we still cannot comprehend it.
有時你讀聖經啊，無蒙講照，
Then there are no enlightenment when we read the Bible.
神有時正着人啊，
God may use people.
神用這姊妹，
God used this sister,
底下講照我。
and she made clear to me
我應該就伫遐一直地將這個我嘅畫走。
I have to take away all this myself, and me.
唔是只有講咧我安尼哦，無你無講我，但是內面嘅態度，若是安尼我也是唔對啊。
Even if you did not say all these 3 words, but if people can notice that what you are talking to them about is yourself, then this attitude is wrong.
我雖然有時話講說小弟咯，還是細囝咯，我無講我小弟細囝，其實啊，唔是在話嘅問題啊。
It is not when you change the I and myself to me as a little brother or as a little child.
對啊，
No, it's not this. It
Okay.
is the attitude.
好似心內嘅態度真重要。
It is the attitude of your heart,
兄弟姊妹，
brothers and sisters.
我自己就係講說一個一直要學嘅一個功課。
This is something that we really need to learn always.
盼望啊，咱就一直地學習啊。
We need to learn.
這個欠變物件是建立喺咱嘅內面，
We have to build up this humility in us.
所以你會看到講掃羅大衛向掃羅做見證，
And David was giving his testimony to King Saul.
你咧講掃羅講啊，
He told King Saul,
即係你嘅僕人要去嗬地下夾一個非利士人來戰，
he said, your servant is going to fight that Philistine.
你唔想我要叫一個我要夾哥利亞地下來戰，
He did not say, I will go and fight Goliath.
即係你嘅僕人為爸親朋友嘅時陣，有屎啊有鹽啊，好來要害我。
Says, your servant, when I was tending your sheep, my father's sheep, sometimes there are bear and lion who comes to harm me.
我哋說你嘅僕人就將應該拍死。
And your servant struck them and killed them.
唔是強調所羅話講，我就將這險使啊佢拍死。
He did not boastfully say to Paul that I did kill all this lion and bear.
兄弟姊妹，
Brothers and sisters,
這個有時啊，講說咱就一直到主嘅面前望更少。
we must come before the Lord to let Him enlighten us.
我是講了時陣，講專輯了時陣，
After I shared a message,
內面有時嘅艱苦啊。
sometimes I feel miserable inside.
兄弟姊妹講感謝主，感謝主，我內面係真艱苦啦。
But some of the brothers and sisters are saying, praise the Lord, thank the Lord for your message, but I still feel not very comfortable inside.
到主嘅面前，底下望更少嘅時陣，
So when I come before the Lord and let Him enlighten
你
me,
怎樣講？我內面這個態度，這個驕傲面出來。
so God told me that I have this proud attitude still within me.
所以我真愛這聖經節啊。
So I really love this verse.
記載喺路加17章第10節條講：這樣，恁做完了一切所吩咐嘅，只當講，阮是無用嘅僕人，所做的本是阮應份做。
This verse is recorded in Luke chapter 17, verse 10. So likewise, you, when you have done all those things which you are commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what was our duty to do.
有時為主做代志，
Sometimes we do things for the Lord.
咱看到哇真成功，
We see that it's quite successful,
啊，這一句對我真大幫助。
but this verse really helped me.
咱做了時陣，咱就安尼講啊，阮是無用嘅僕人，所做的本是阮應份做。
But afterwards, we must say to the Lord that we are unprofitable servants, that we have done what was our duty to do.
咱我看講，這大衛謙卑順從伊嘅爸爸去戰場啊，
You can see that David humbly obeyed his father and went to the battlefield.
伯利恆要到以色列國啊，有差不多24支跳啊。
There was 24 miles between the valley of Elah and Bethlehem.
伊個是咩？帶着真濟物件，要托伊阿兄，我帶着真濟物件，要托伊個千夫長啊。
And he was carrying a lot of things, very heavy things, for his brother and also for the centurion.
你會看到啊，24支哦，24公里啊，我底下一直行路啊，
He was walking this 24 miles.
佢行偌久嘅時間，
We don't know how long he walked.
唔是講總是平路啊。
It is not a very smooth path,
哦，所以你會看到講說，大衛啊，一定肯受苦，
but he was there. He was willing to suffer.
謙卑嘅底下來順從伊嘅爸爸。
He humbly obeyed his father.
然後食嗰時講，雖然嗰時真艱苦，我說落雖然是危險啊，伊也底下聽因爸爸所吩咐嘅。
Even though it was so risky, he still obeyed his father.
十秒你記上17章16節講，迄個非利士人，哦早晚攏出來徛着，如此40日啊。
And it says in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 16, the Philistines drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening.
你看40日早起亞米啊底下，我底下咧甲以色列人挑戰。
And he was challenging the Israelites for the last 40 days.
十秒你記上17章17節一日，耶穌對伊嘅囝大衛講：你為一發行了嘅水啊，甲10個餅，哦，底下趕緊嘅送到營內去，交託你阿兄。
1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 17, then Jesse said to his son David, take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves and run to your brothers at the camp.
十秒你記上17章19節講，掃羅甲大衛3個阿兄，哦，甲以色列眾人攏哦，攏佇 以列國甲非利士人伫遐要拍戰。
In verse 19, it says, Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting the Philistines.
伫遐正要拍的時陣啊，
It was at the time when they were about to fight.
亞西車伊家伫遐去，
So Jesse had sent David to go to the battlefield.
大衛講說拍真危險啦，這個時陣無我真危險啊！
David can say, Father, it is a very dangerous,
伊伫遐順服落來，順服落來，
but he submitted
伊伫遐照因爸爸所吩咐的。
and he went as his father commanded.
因為伊知影講說攏總是神的手啊，
He knew that everything is in God's hand.
所以你會看到講撒母耳記上17章20節啊，記載講大衛早晨起來，將羊交託一個看守的人，照伊爸爸所吩咐的話，帶着食物去了，到了伫遐市中市中營的時陣啊，軍兵剛剛出去伫遐戰場，伫遐咧發要征戰。
So in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 20, so David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for the battle.
大衛去的時陣啊，是去一個戰場，正要征戰的時陣啊。
David went to the battlefield, and it is the time when the battle is about to begin.
你看到這是神給大衛這個機會，
So we can see this is the opportunity of God given to
是
David.
使大衛無要順服的時陣，
If David did not obey his
伊
father,
無安尼謙卑服伫因爸爸的手呢。
if he did not humbly submit to his father's command,
誰要抬過你啊？
now who will be the one to kill Goliath?
這是大衛神給大衛這個機會。
So this was the chance that God has given David.
你謙卑的照着因爸爸的吩咐，去行真遠的路，去到一個危險的所在。
He humbly followed his father's command and went to a far place where the battle is about to begin.
咱就看落去啊，只以利亞怎啊底下你來責備啊，大衛。
And we want to see how Eliab had
我以利亞
Eliab
嘛，
had rebuked David.
咱只是要來看大衛怎啊反應。
We want to see how David responded to this.
撒母耳記上17章26節記載講，大衛問遐着邊頭的人講，有人抬非利士人除掉以色列人的奸笑，怎啊抬因呢？這未受割禮的非利士人是誰啊呢？竟佇遐假向影響神的軍隊，佇遐咧罵電啊！
So in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 26, then David spoke to the man who stood by him, saying, What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?
這次咱看撒母耳記上17章28節啊，這大衛的阿兄以利亞聽了大衛甲因所講的話，甲因所講的話，就向伊發怒講：你落來做什麼呢？你曠野的徘徊為這的羊啊，你交託誰啊呢？我知影你的驕傲，甲你心內的惡意，你落來特為要看征戰。
1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 28. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard what he spoke to the men, when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle.
咱就看到講說，以利亞怎啊底下來責備大衛。
You can see how Eliab had rebuked David.
咱看大衛怎啊的反應。
we should see how David responded to this.
以利亞向大衛發怒啊，聖經講。
And it says in the Bible that Eliab had became angry with David.
其實啊，以利亞本是啲啊怨妒大衛，
The truth is, Eliab was very jealous of David.
應該是長子啊，啲啊被告啊。
It was supposed to be the eldest son that was to be anointed.
但撒母耳啊，告一個告大衛就殺咩伊個小弟啊。
But Samuel instead anointed his youngest brother David.
然後你會看到講說，啲啊掃羅啲啊喜愛大衛，
And we can see that Saul delighted in David.
同大衛做一位兵器啦。
And David had become his armor bearer.
大衛喺掃羅眼中是啊蒙恩啊。
And also David found favor in the king's
你
sight.
講以利亞係真受氣無歡喜呢？
And so Eliab was not very pleased with it.
我是長子啊，
I'm the eldest of them all.
應該神嘅祝福是喺我底啊，
The blessings of God should be upon me.
應該撒母耳就告我啊，
Samuel should have anointed me.
還多等告我殺咩這小弟啊？
But he instead anointed my youngest
我
brother.
所看見嘅這個小弟啊，
This brother whom we despised.
你在是受氣。
That's why he was angry.
即係我哋看大衛講說，上啊，我當要去上啊，拍死這個歌利亞嘅時陣，我當得到什麼啊？
And even heard David ask, anyone who kills this Philistine, what will be given to him?
了這個歌利亞，底下假底下用到神，又話軍隊底下咧罵定啊！
And why is this uncircumcised Philistine defying the armies of the living God?
大衛我當講咗一位，
David can say these things.
這個殺咩小弟我當啲嗌啊，我在人嘅面前講出番話。
And this youngest brother of theirs can say such things in front of all these people.
這個唔是大衛嘅驕傲啦，講出來話。
This is not being boastful,
大衛啊，啲啊關心神嘅見證。
but it is because David was concerned with the testimony of God.
是這個歌利亞假底下你嚟羞辱咗神，以前就神嘅軍隊底下咧罵定嘅啦。
But why does this uncircumcised Philistine defying the armies of the living God?
以利亞唔敢講出來話，
Eliab dare not speak
因為
such
真驚。
because he himself was very afraid.
聖經講是掃羅及大衛三個阿兄，及將以色列人啊講說極其嘅害怕。
It says in the Bible, Saul and the three brothers of David and the people are very afraid.
但只有一個少年人來，
But here comes a young person,
好似像講咧講大話，
as if he's saying something very boastful,
是以利亞唔敢講嘅。
something that Eliab dare not say.
但你講出來時陣是因為伊底下真關心神嘅見證。
But he said these because he was concerned with the testimony of God.
是在是耶和華嘅軍隊啊！
Said these are armies of the living God.
在以色列人啊，
These are Israelites.
同這個無受割禮人底下咧羞辱底下咧罵定啊！
Why is this uncircumcised Philistine defying us?
你看到大衛無有向着伊嘅阿兄以利亞來表白啊！
But David, after the rebuke, did not justify himself.
了你看講說，伊講說，佇懷佇曠野會懷幾隻羊，你交託誰啊？
And the brother even said, how about those few sheep? Whom did you give them to?
就你看到講說，這以利亞啊，看大衛是看真輕，看做一個僕人啊，就過因爸爸嘅羊啊！
You can see how this elder brother had despised his youngest brother, that he should remain at home tending his father's sheep.
就我突然看講說，大衛倒去厝內時陣，實在是咧，過因爸爸嘅羊。
And it really was the fact that David did attend his fathership when he goes home to Bethlehem.
以利亞講大衛講，我知影你會驕傲。
And Eliab said to David, I know you're very proud,
兄弟姊妹，
brothers and sisters.
一個驕傲嘅人，一個較驕傲嘅人，才會發能講別人會驕傲。
One who is very conceited can regard others as such.
我知影你心內惡意。
And he said, I know the evil intent of your heart.
你看到我一個人歹啦，惡人啊，伊會佇遐要講別人啊，是歹啊。
One who is wicked will judge others as doing the same.
兄弟姊妹，
So, brothers and sisters,
我常常佇遐圖我一個真大嘅提醒啊。
this is a great reminder for me.
我有同我嘅囡仔講咧，
I even tell my children,
你若看到別人嘅唔對啊，
if you see the shortcomings of other people,
唔是要講因嘅歹，
don't say that they did wrong,
是也要提醒咱毋做因所做。
but it will remind us only not to do what they had done.
伫我嘅時陣，你看到別人歹，
As for you, when you see them doing evil deeds
你就佇遐望光照。
and you are enlightened,
可能啊，親像馬太福音第7章3節所講嘅，
like in Matthew chapter 7, verse 3, it says,
你講真啊，你看到你嘅兄弟會一支刺伫目睭一支刺啊，
and if you see a thorn in the eyes of your brother,
無想開起嘅目睭中有一個梁木啊，
but there's a big log in front of your eyes,
意思你係看到別人嘅細細嘅歹處，
meaning that you saw the small wrong that someone did,
神要提醒咱有安尼大嘅短處啊，
but God is going to remind us that you have a bigger wrongdoing.
所以定罪人啊，
So you should not judge others.
係攏總是佇黑暗內啊。
Those who judge others are all in darkness.
你看到約翰一書第5章遐有講。
In 1 John chapter 5, it says,
你若看到你嘅兄弟咧犯罪時陣，
if you see your brother sinning,
你講說你要推祈禱，
pray for them.
祈禱
Pray
唔是要定罪嘅人，
and not to condemn him.
兄弟姊妹，
Brothers and sisters,
盼望啊，咱佇遐有法通佇即件代志啊，佇教會中有法通彼此相聽，
I hope that in our church we should love one another
唔是彼此嘅定罪，
and we do not condemn each other
是彼此嘅帶導。
and we pray for each other.
然後講說，我知影你來嘅時陣，特為要看征戰啊。
Eliab said to David, I know you specially came to watch the battle.
你成日要去戰場看征戰，
Who would do such a thing to watch a battle?
寫書以色列人若輸啦，
So if Israel was defeated,
連大衛去睇死呢？
even David will be killed.
我若唔是攞掠去逃去利斯人做奴才啊！
Or even be captured as a slave by the Philistines.
上啊，愛去啊看征戰啊！
Who would want to go to a battlefield and watch the battle?
大衛伊無表白，伊無講理由，
David was there not to justify himself, nor even to reason out.
若是我，
If it were I,
你講，是爸爸找我話怎邊要互恁食呢？
I would say to the brother that, do you not know that it was Father who sent me to bring all these loaves for you to eat?
我行返遠嘅路，夾返東嘅物件，要來餵互你呢？
I walked such far distances and very heavy burden to bring all these things to you.
伊無講理由，
He never reasoned out.
伊無為家己表白，
He did not justify himself.
這個是一個真深嘅功課。
This is a very profound lesson,
兄弟姊妹，
brothers and sisters.
甲家你看講說，難怪神會看到大衛是合乎伊心意嘅人。
So you can see that God has seen David as one who is after his own heart.
啲啊謙卑落來，
He was very humble.
你做你講我係短處，
Never mind you tell me my shortcoming.
我無要講理由，
I will not reason out.
我無要表白。
I will not justify myself.
兄弟姊妹，
Brothers and sisters,
耶穌16年看到以利亞，對着大衛所講嘅話，以利亞嘅態度，我哋咧責備大衛嘅時陣，
had Samuel seen Eliab, how Eliab had treated and talked to David,
你會看到講說，伊聽起來講說，較加啊，神無揀選以利亞。
so he will say, that's why God did not choose Eliab.
你聖經韓文是講說，神無揀選以利亞啊。
The Chinese Bible says, God did not choose Eliab.
但是原文是講說，神真憎惡以利亞。
The original text, it says, God rejected or refused Eliab
對啊，因為神是看人嘅內心。
because God sees the heart of a
你
person.
看到大衛底下嘅溫柔嘅謙卑啊！
He can see the gentleness and also the humility of David.
你會看詩篇69篇第8條記載。
In Psalm chapter 69, verse 8, it records,
伊也表達講說，伊兄弟底下會怎樣對待伊呢？
he expressed how his brothers had been treating him.
你會看詩篇69篇第8節講，我嘅弟兄看我為外路人，我嘅同胞看我為外邦人啊！
It says in Psalm 69, verse 8, I have become a stranger to my brothers and an alien to my mother's children.
所以你會看講說，大衛一知伊內面有時嘅功課會寫出來。
Sometimes what is inside him is very sad about what is happening to him. So he had written it in Psalms.
唔是要叫人同情，
It is not to get your sympathy.
伊底下要互人看講神怎樣安慰。
He wrote this so that he is showing us how God is comforting him.
雖然我父母離棄我，神底下要接納我吧。
And he said that even though my parents have forsaken me, but God has been taking care of me.
有一個神底下要來保護我，要接納我。
Here is a God who is going to protect me and who is going to take care of me.
所以你看大衛底下嘅反應啊，
So we can see David's response.
17章29節，伊甲講16年記上17章29節，大衛講：我做了什麼呢？唔是只講了一句話嗎？
And in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 29, it says, What have I done then? It was only a word.
主嘅僕人啊 ，David Gusick。
The Lord's servant, David Gusick,
是什麼套大話有法通底下來處理這個傷害？
What？
底下真艱苦呢？底下責備嘅時陣，什麼套有法通處理這個傷害？
what made David put aside his personal hurt?
伊講說是大話，底下關心神嘅見證，而唔是家己嘅感覺。
He was more concerned with God's testimony rather than his own feelings.
大話無時間及乜嘢阿兄冤家。
He had no time to quarrel with his brother.
大衛知影講說，敵人唔是我的阿兄，敵人是做非利士人，是這個哥利亞。
My enemy is not my brother, but the Philistines, and especially Goliath.
這個無術格咧，這個人啊，向影響神嘅軍隊條咧馬丁。
And this uncircumcised Philistine who's defying the armies of the living God.
聖經者解經者名做 Matthew Henry，
There's a Bible expositor called Matthew Henry.
即大衛這種嘅卑微征服家己嘅肉體啊！
It is about David's humility which overcame his carnal pride.
伊無發脾氣，
He did not become angry.
伊無甲伊阿兄爭論，
He did not debate with his brother.
伊無講理由，
He did not reason out.
伊无讲表，伊无表白，
He did not justify himself
伊安尼做的时阵，
when he did not do all these.
是比伊征服歌利亚更加光荣啊！
It says, what he had done was far more glorious than defeating Goliath.
兄弟姊妹，
Brothers and sisters,
伫遐神是看咱的内心啊！
God can see what's inside our hearts.
你知咱的内心，神知影啦，真知影。
God knows our hearts.
你会看到头摆咱所读的米迦，米迦书第6章8节条记载。
And in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, it's recorded.
伊讲说，世人啊，耶和华伊指示你何为善啊？伊向你所要的是什么呢？只要你行公义，好人面刷落去讲说，这叫尊谦卑的心，甲你的心同行。
Micah 6:8, he has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
这圣经节是咱的主的牧人启导兄真爱的这个圣经节。
This is a favorite verse of our brother John Jeng.
然后伊伫遐咧带领在夫妇波，在较有服侍的。
When he was training some of the brothers in the couples group,
哦，伫遐伊将这圣经节讨因。
he gave this verse to them.
我看到这圣经节搭咧一个兄弟的车咧。
So I saw this verse in a sticker that is in our brother's car.
哦，是有的是将一张这个白纸，伊家刻咧搭咧伊的车。
And he used a white paper background with this verse on it.
我看到兄弟哦，创做 sticker 搭咧伊的车。
And some of one brother also used this verse as a sticker to put on the car, on his car.
神要的是咱着尊这谦卑的心，然后甲你的神同行。
And he says we have to walk humbly with our God.
兄弟姊妹，咱无啥物通骄吼，
There's nothing to be boastful about,
咱以为咱真多通骄傲。
but sometimes we think there are so many things that we can boast about.
安尼骄傲，咱是一戆人啊！
If we boast about anything we have, you are really a fool
咱唔捌什神的恩典，唔知影神的恩典，
because you do not know God's grace
啊，唔是唔知影神的荣耀。
and you do not know God's glory.
这是讲说，我一直在犯错啊！
Sometimes you should say, I am a sinner.
哦，我哋一直在做一个，我本身一直做一个唔对的骄傲起来。
I myself has this sin of being proud,
我真感谢主，
but I thank the Lord.
主会光照，
God will enlighten me.
主伊的话
God uses His word
内面的痛苦，
and He gives me uncomfortable
Yeah,
inwards.
托一直来提醒我。
He will remind me always.
我是真感谢主的一件事。
I thank the Lord greatly for this.
有一位弟兄捌做一个做牧人弟兄捌做一个故事啊，讲这个故事。
Our brother Jeng had given us this story.
一个法国人，伊是真卑微伫遐环境中也成长的。
There is a Frenchman had a very humble beginning.
但是到落尾成功的时阵，成为一个真高贵的地位。
But later he became successful, full, and a very distinguished aristocrat.
伊早年的时阵伊是一个过洋的，做一个牧人。
In his early years, he was a shepherd.
伊就只有一个王宫咯，
But now he has this big palace.
王宫内伊创一个房啊，
And in this palace is a special room.
叫做牧羊人的一个房，牧羊人一个房。
It's called the shepherd's room.
这个房的时阵伊有创作reproduction 嘛，
And in that room were
有
reproductions.
去创作小山咯，有角咯，
And there are hills and valleys.
有叫做河水咯，像溪水咯，
And running streams
然后佫有做羊，
and also sheepfolds.
伊个乖放伫遐，
And his staff
伊咧
was
往买
there.
用的乖放伫遐，
The staff that he once carried was in there,
伊咧饲羊的衫破落，伊也是刻伫遐。
and all the clothes he had worn, torn clothes he had worn as a lad was also there.
一日当
One day,
人问伊，
a person asked him,
这个什么意思？
"What do all these mean?"
这当我伫遐要骄傲的时阵，
And he said, "If ever my heart is tempted to become haughty and proud,
我就你去个房，
I would go into that room,
带我以往是什么？
and it will remind me of what I once was."
兄弟姊妹，
Brothers and sisters,
你我有什么通骄傲？
is there anything we can boast about?
咱拢是罪人蒙神的恩典。
We are all sinners saved by grace.
若无神的拯救，你我伫倒落。
If God did not save us, where would we be now?
但是就是讲，咱这个，咱这个人是真难办。
So this person is very hard to deal
我
with.
底下是在讲说，一直要骄傲。
We always want to become proud.
求主底下，愿主底下怜悯咱，
May the Lord have mercy upon us,
互咱我通尊这谦卑的心，甲咱的神同行。
that we may humbly walk with our God.
来阿头三祈祷，
Let's bow our heads to pray.
主，阮赞美你，阮感谢你。所以早起同阮看去，大卫，像是合乎神心意的人，神伊底下的谦卑啊，伊如何的谦卑？赞美你，感谢你。伊像我底下一直来底下，做卑微的一个心底下来顺从伊的爸爸。哦，像我这说底下吩咐什么，伊就做什么。做一个这说牧羊的一个人。这说赞美你，感谢你。但愿你只恩待怜悯阮，主啊，托阮。一直看起，阮不过是一个罪人蒙了的恩典。实在主无什么通骄傲，但是就是真骄傲。主啊，赦免我，赦免罪行，怜悯罪行。这说当阮你伫遐托阮，我通亲像大卫，会谦卑心。主啊，亲像米迦所讲的，你爱阮伫遐存这谦卑的心，甘你来当行。这说托阮看去讲，阮不过是一个罪人蒙了你的恩典，实在无什么通夸口。赞美你，感谢你。若毋是你抬起阮，若毋是你提拔阮，阮拢无什么。感谢你，赞美你。但愿你伫遐一直会提醒阮，一直会光照阮，同阮一直活伫你的光中。赞美你，感谢你。荣耀是你的，奉主耶稣的名。
Amen.
Amen.